The words came through the phone speaker like shards of glass, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. "You're useless, Amanda. You always have been. I don't know why I wasted 12 years of my life with someone so pathetically dependent and unambitious. Vanessa makes me feel alive in ways you never could. We're boarding the flight to Bali now, and when I come back, I want you out of my house, out of my life. I've already contacted my lawyer. You'll be hearing from him soon enough." I stood in our kitchen, the phone pressed against my ear, my hand gripping the granite countertop so hard my knuckles turned white. The morning light filtered through the bay windows. I'd spent 3 weekends painting last spring, creating patterns on the floor that suddenly seemed meaningless. Everything seemed meaningless in that moment. The coffee maker burbled behind me, finishing its cycle, the rich aroma filling the air like it did every morning. Except this morning, everything was different. This morning, my husband of 12 years had just told me I was useless before boarding a plane to a luxury resort in Bali with his new girlfriend. Not girlfriend. He'd called her his new wife, which meant somewhere in the past few months, while I'd been planning our anniversary dinner and picking out the perfect gift and believing we were working through a rough patch like every long-term couple does, he'd been planning his exit, planning his future with someone else, someone named Vanessa, who apparently made him feel alive. I set the phone down on the counter with a trembling hand and stared at it like it was a foreign object, like it hadn't just delivered the news that shattered my entire world into pieces too small to ever put back together. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence, 8:42 in the morning on a Tuesday in October. The kind of crisp fall day that usually made me grateful to be alive, grateful for the cozy home and the stable marriage and the predictable routine that had defined my life for over a decade. Except none of it had been real. None of it had been stable. While I'd been living in what I thought was our shared reality, Gregory had been living in an entirely different world, a world where I was useless, where he was unhappy, where someone named Vanessa existed and had apparently stolen my husband without me even noticing. I walked to the window and looked out at our backyard. The garden I'd spent the entire summer cultivating stretched out before me, the last of the autumn flowers still clinging to life despite the cooling temperatures. I'd planted every single bulb myself, had researched the best varieties for our soil type, had watered and weeded and fertilized and pruned, had taken such pride in creating this beautiful space where we could sit together on weekend mornings, drinking coffee and talking about our dreams, except we hadn't done that in months, maybe longer. When had Gregory stopped joining me for coffee in the garden? When had he stopped asking about my day? When had the comfortable silence between us shifted from peaceful to distant? I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. It had been gradual, so gradual that I'd convinced myself it was normal, that all marriages went through phases, that the passion would return once we got through this busy season at his work, once the stress of his promotion settled down, once things calmed down, and we could focus on us again. But there was no us anymore. There was Gregory and Vanessa on a plane to Bali, and there was me, standing alone in a kitchen that suddenly felt like it belonged to a stranger. The coffee maker beeped, signaling the end of its cycle. I'd set it last night like I did every night, programming it to have Gregory's coffee ready when he left for his early morning flight. Except he hadn't been here this morning. He'd left last night, I realize now. Probably went straight from work to pick up Vanessa and head to the airport. The business trip to Singapore he'd told me about didn't exist. It had been Bali all along, a romantic getaway with his new wife, while I sat at home being useless. I poured myself a cup of coffee, even though my hands were shaking so badly I spilled half of it on the counter. The hot liquid pooled on the granite surface, spreading slowly toward the edge. I watched it drip onto the floor, one drop at a time, and felt nothing. Numbness had settled over me like a heavy blanket, muffling everything except the relentless tick of the kitchen clock and the voice in my head replaying Gregory's words on an endless loop. Useless, pathetically dependent, unambitious, wasted 12 years. I'd given him 12 years, the best years of my life. I'd been 26 when we met, fresh out of graduate school with a master's degree in education and plans to change the world one classroom at a time. I'd been teaching at an elementary school in downtown Portland, living in a tiny apartment with 2 roommates, barely making enough to cover my student loans, but absolutely in love with my job. I'd been independent, ambitious, anything but useless. Gregory had been a junior analyst at an investment firm, charming and confident, and seemingly fascinated by my passion for teaching. He'd pursued me relentlessly, showing up at my school with coffee, leaving notes on my car, calling me every evening to talk for hours about everything and nothing. He'd made me feel special, seen, like I was the most interesting person he'd ever met. We'd gotten married after dating for 2 years. A beautiful ceremony at a vineyard in Willamette Valley, surrounded by friends and family, full of hope and promises and plans for the future. I remembered standing at the altar, looking into his eyes, believing with absolute certainty that I'd found my person, my partner for life, the one who would stand beside me through everything. The first few years had been good, more than good. We'd bought this house together, a modest 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood with good schools for the children we planned to have someday. We'd painted walls together, argued over furniture choices, hosted dinner parties with other young couples. We'd taken camping trips and beach weekends and that amazing 2-week adventure through Europe for our 5th anniversary. We'd talked about our dreams late into the night, making plans, building a life. But then things started to shift, subtly at first. Gregory got promoted to senior analyst, then to associate director, then to director of his division. More responsibility meant longer hours, more stress, more travel. I understood. I supported him. I took care of everything at home so he could focus on his career. Made sure dinner was ready when he got home late. Handled all the household maintenance and bills and errands. Canceled my own plans when he needed me to attend work functions or entertain clients. I told myself I was being a good wife, a supportive partner, that we were a team, and this was my contribution while his career took off, that my turn would come later, once he was more established and had more flexibility, that we'd revisit my career goals and my dreams once his situation stabilized. Except it never stabilized. There was always another promotion to chase, another big project, another crisis at work that required his full attention. And gradually, without me even noticing, I'd stopped being a person with my own goals and dreams. I'd become Gregory's wife, the woman who kept his house running smoothly and attended his work events and made sure his life was comfortable and easy. I'd quit teaching after 5 years of marriage. It had been Gregory's suggestion, presented as a joint decision. His income had grown significantly, and my teaching salary barely covered daycare costs for the children we planned to have soon. Wouldn't it make more sense for me to stay home? I could always go back to teaching later, once the kids were in school themselves. And in the meantime, I could focus on creating a beautiful home, maybe do some volunteer work, take some art classes, pursue hobbies I never had time for when I was working full-time. It had made sense at the time, or at least I'd convinced myself it made sense. I'd told myself it was a temporary arrangement, a practical decision, that I was lucky to have the option to step away from a demanding career and focus on other aspects of life. Except the children never came. Month after month, year after year, the pregnancy tests came back negative. We'd started trying right after I quit teaching, both of us eager to start our family. But nothing happened. After 3 years of trying naturally, we'd consulted specialists, undergone tests, tried treatments. I'd subjected myself to countless procedures, hormone injections, invasive examinations, the emotional roller coaster of hope and disappointment that came with each failed cycle. Gregory had seemed supportive through it all, held my hand during appointments, told me it would happen when the time was right, that we just needed to be patient and trust the process. But looking back now, I could see the truth I'd been too desperate to acknowledge. He'd been pulling away even then. The disappointment in his eyes after each negative test wasn't just about the lack of a baby. It was disappointment in me, in my failure to give him the family he wanted. After 5 years of fertility treatments with no success, we'd agreed to take a break. The physical and emotional toll had been exhausting, and our relationship was strained. We needed time to reconnect, to remember why we'd fallen in love in the first place. That's what we'd told ourselves and everyone who asked. But the truth was simpler and more painful. Gregory had given up on having children, on me, on us. That had been 2 years ago, and in those 2 years, I'd tried everything to save our marriage. I'd suggested counseling. He'd been too busy. I'd planned romantic weekends away. He'd had to work. I'd tried initiating intimate moments. He'd been too tired. I'd attempted to talk about the growing distance between us. He'd insisted everything was fine. I was just being overly sensitive. We were just in a comfortable phase of marriage. Comfortable. What a lie that word had been. There was nothing comfortable about the slow death of a relationship, about feeling yourself becoming invisible to the person you'd built your life around. But I'd believed him because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. I'd convinced myself that I was overthinking things, being dramatic, letting my own insecurities create problems that didn't exist. Now I knew the truth. It hadn't been my imagination. Gregory had been pulling away because he was already gone. He'd checked out of our marriage emotionally, long before he made it official with Vanessa. And I'd been too busy trying to be the perfect wife, too busy blaming myself for our lack of connection, too busy holding on to what we'd once had to see what was actually happening. I walked through the house slowly, coffee mug in hand, seeing everything through new eyes. The living room with its carefully coordinated furniture and throw pillows I'd spent weeks selecting. The dining room with the antique table I'd refinished myself, spending hours sanding and staining until it was perfect. The guest bedroom I'd converted into a home office for Gregory, painting the walls his favorite shade of blue, installing custom shelving for his books, creating a space where he could work comfortably from home. Every room told the story of my investment in this marriage, my time, my energy, my creativity, my love. I'd poured everything I had into creating a beautiful home for us, into being the kind of wife I thought Gregory wanted, into building the life I believed we both cherished. And he'd called me useless. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. The bed was unmade from where I'd slept alone last night, believing Gregory was already on his way to Singapore. His side of the closet stood open, and I could see the gaps where his suitcase and clothes should have been. He'd packed yesterday, I realized, probably while I was at the grocery store buying his favorite foods for when he returned from his fake business trip. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let myself cry. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere so deep inside me I hadn't known it existed. I cried for the 12 years I'd given him, for the career I'd abandoned, for the children we'd never had, for the woman I'd been before I met him, ambitious and independent and full of dreams, for the woman I'd become, small and diminished and apparently useless. I cried until there were no tears left, until my eyes were swollen, and my throat was raw, and my chest ached from the force of it. Then I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, at the light fixture I'd picked out 3 years ago when we'd renovated the bedroom, and felt something shift inside me. The numbness was fading, burned away by the heat of my grief, and underneath it, something else was emerging. Something hard and cold and clear. Anger, not the hot, explosive kind that makes you scream and throw things, but the ice-cold variety that clarifies everything, that cuts through confusion and doubt and self-blame like a knife through butter. Gregory thought I was useless. He thought he could discard me like I was nothing, like 12 years of marriage meant nothing, like I was just an inconvenience to be dealt with by his lawyer. He thought he could take everything while leaving me with nothing but the label of abandoned wife, the woman who couldn't even keep her husband interested, who couldn't give him children, who wasn't exciting enough or ambitious enough or alive enough. He'd underestimated me, badly, because while I'd been playing the role of devoted wife, I'd also been managing every aspect of our household finances. I had access to all our accounts. I knew where every dollar was, how much we had in savings and investments, which assets were in whose name. I'd been the one handling the bills and managing the budget and making sure everything ran smoothly while Gregory focused on his career. And suddenly, that knowledge felt like power. I sat up, wiped my face, and walked to Gregory's home office. The computer was still on, logged into his account because he never bothered to log out at home. Too trusting, too confident that I would never invade his privacy or question his decisions. After all, I was useless. What threat could I possibly pose? I opened his email and started reading. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Messages between him and Vanessa going back 8 months, love notes, planning emails, hotel reservations, discussions about their future together. And there, buried in a folder he'd titled Legal, correspondence with a divorce attorney. He'd been planning this for months, had consulted with an attorney 6 weeks ago, had discussed asset division and settlement offers, had calculated how little he could get away with giving me based on the fact that the house was in his name only, that I hadn't worked in 7 years, that I had no independent income or assets of my own. The attorney's email laid it out clearly. Since I'd voluntarily left my career, since we had no children, since the house and most assets were in Gregory's name alone, I had limited legal standing. I might be entitled to some temporary support, maybe a small settlement, but nothing significant. And if Gregory could prove the marriage had been irretrievably broken for some time, which his documented evidence of our separate lives would support, even that would be minimal. They'd planned this carefully, systematically, had built a case that would leave me with almost nothing while Gregory walked away with everything we'd built together. The house, the savings, the investments, the comfortable life I'd helped create by sacrificing my own career and dreams. I kept reading, my anger growing colder and sharper with each email. There were messages about the Bali trip, about how it would be their honeymoon even though they couldn't legally marry yet, about how Gregory would file for divorce the day after he returned, would have me served with papers, would move quickly to finalize everything before I had time to mount a proper defense. There was an email to his sister, explaining the situation in terms that made him sound like the victim, how I'd become withdrawn and depressed after our fertility struggles, how I'd lost interest in everything including our marriage, how he'd tried to help, but I'd refused counseling, how he'd met Vanessa at a work conference and finally felt understood and appreciated again, how sometimes you had to choose your own happiness even when it meant making difficult decisions. The narrative was carefully constructed, designed to make him look reasonable and me look unstable. And his family would believe it because they only knew what he told them, because I'd been too private about our struggles to share them with anyone, because I'd put on a brave face and pretended everything was fine even when it wasn't. I opened another folder, this one titled Finance. Inside were spreadsheets tracking all our assets, notes about how to structure things to minimize what I could claim, discussions with the attorney about legal strategies to protect his wealth, our wealth, the money we'd saved together, even if his income had been larger, the investments we'd discussed and decided on together, the future we were supposed to be building as partners. He'd mapped out exactly how to leave me with as little as possible, and he'd done it while still sleeping beside me every night, still accepting my care and attention and devotion, still letting me believe we were working through a rough patch that would eventually smooth out. The betrayal was complete. It wasn't just that he'd fallen in love with someone else, it was that he'd strategically planned to destroy me in the process, to take everything while leaving me with nothing, not even my dignity. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated me, had seen my kindness as weakness, my support as dependency, my love as desperation. He'd looked at the woman who'd sacrificed her career to support his and seen someone with no options, no resources, no ability to fight back. He'd forgotten that I'd once been a different woman. Before I'd become his wife, I'd been someone who could handle a classroom of 30 children, who could navigate school politics and parent conflicts and budget crises. I'd been someone who'd graduated top of her class, who'd won teaching awards, who'd been offered positions at prestigious private schools that I'd turned down because I wanted to make a difference in public education. I'd been competent, strategic, strong. I hadn't lost those qualities by becoming a wife. I just set them aside, channeled them into different areas, into managing a household, into supporting a husband, into being the person I thought I was supposed to be. But that person was gone now, burned away by the heat of Gregory's betrayal. And in her place was someone harder, someone who understood that nice girls finish last, that sacrifice is often mistaken for weakness, that playing by the rules only works when both people are playing the same game. Gregory had changed the rules without telling me, had been playing a completely different game for months while I kept trying to win at the old one. But now I knew. Now I understood exactly what kind of game this was, and I was going to play to win. I looked at the clock, 9:37 in the morning. Gregory's flight to Bali had left at 8:15. It was a long flight, nearly 20 hours with a connection in Tokyo. He wouldn't land until tomorrow morning Pacific time, which meant I had approximately 32 hours before he arrived at his destination and discovered what I was about to do. 32 hours to make sure that when Gregory stepped off that plane expecting to start his new life with Vanessa, he'd find nothing waiting but the ruins of his careful plans. I opened our banking website and logged into our joint account, the one we'd opened together 12 years ago, the one where both our names had equal authority, the one we'd always maintained for household expenses and shared savings. The balance showed $243,000. Years of careful saving and investment returns, the cushion we'd built for our future, the security I thought we were creating together. With a few clicks, I initiated a transfer. Not all of it. That would be too obvious, too easy to challenge legally. But half, exactly half, $121,500, moved from our joint account to a new account I opened in my name, only at a different bank. Then I logged into our investment accounts. Gregory's name was primary on most of them, but I had access as his spouse. I couldn't move those funds, but I could see them. Could see the $400,000 in stocks and bonds and mutual funds, the retirement accounts, the savings bonds, all of it carefully documented in the spreadsheet I'd found in his email, all of it part of his calculation about what he'd keep and what he'd have to share. I took screenshots of everything, downloaded statements, created my own documentation of every asset we owned, every account in his name or ours, every penny that existed in our financial universe. I'd need this for my own attorney, for building my own case, for making sure I got what I was entitled to, regardless of what Gregory's lawyer claimed. Next, I went through his email more thoroughly, forwarding messages to a new email address I created, building my own archive of evidence, the affair, the planning, the conspiracy with his attorney, the disparaging comments about me, the narrative he'd constructed to justify his actions, all of it saved and backed up in multiple locations where he couldn't delete or hide it. Then I called a locksmith, had them come out immediately to change all the locks on the house. Gregory's name might be the only one on the deed, but this was still my primary residence, and I had every legal right to secure it. When he returned from Bali, he wouldn't be walking back into his house. He'd be standing on the porch, discovering that his keys no longer worked, that his plan to simply move me out while he moved on had been disrupted. While waiting for the locksmith, I went through the house more carefully, taking stock of everything: the furniture I'd bought or refinished, the art I'd selected, the kitchen equipment I'd collected over years of cooking his meals, the books I'd given him as gifts, the electronics, the decorations, everything that filled this house and made it a home. Most of it I'd purchased with money from our joint account, which meant most of it was as much mine as his, regardless of whose name was on the house deed. I started making a list, documenting what belonged to whom, photographing everything. More evidence, more ammunition, more proof that I wasn't the useless, dependent woman he'd described to his lawyer. The locksmith arrived at 11. I had all the exterior locks changed and rekeyed, received 3 copies of the new keys, and watched as the old locks went into his toolbox. Another door closed on my old life, another step toward something new. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and started researching divorce attorneys. Not just any attorneys, the best ones, the aggressive ones, the ones with reputations for protecting their clients and fighting hard for favorable settlements, the ones who wouldn't be intimidated by Gregory's hotshot lawyer or his carefully constructed narrative. I found 3 who looked promising and sent inquiry emails to all of them, attaching the documentation I'd gathered and briefly outlining my situation. Then I waited, forcing myself to eat some lunch even though I had no appetite, drinking water, trying to stay grounded in practical action instead of spinning out into the emotions churning just beneath my surface calm. By 3 o'clock, all 3 attorneys had responded. All 3 wanted to meet with me immediately. All 3 saw the strength of my position and the weakness in Gregory's strategy. All 3 assured me that his plan to leave me with almost nothing wasn't going to work out the way he'd hoped. I scheduled consultations with each of them for the next day, back to back, determined to find the one who understood not just the legal aspects, but the emotional truth of what Gregory had done. The one who would fight for me not just as a client, but as a person who deserved better than what she'd been given. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my old friend Jennifer, the one I'd taught with before I quit, the one I'd gradually lost touch with as my world had shrunk to just Gregory and his needs and his life. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice warm and surprised and happy to hear from me. "Amanda, oh my goodness, it's been forever. How are you?" And just like that, the dam broke again. I told her everything, the phone call that morning, the discovery of the affair and the legal planning, the betrayal, the anger, the actions I'd taken. All of it poured out in a rush of words and tears, everything I'd been holding inside all day, finally finding release. Jennifer listened without interrupting, letting me purge it all. When I finally stopped, exhausted and empty, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that changed everything. "Amanda, do you remember when we were teaching together, and you handled that situation with Principal Morrison? When he tried to blame you for the budget shortfall and you proved he'd been misappropriating funds? You gathered evidence, built a case, and took him down so thoroughly he resigned rather than face an investigation. You were brilliant, strategic, relentless. I always admired that about you. That underneath all your kindness was this core of steel. I'd forgotten about that, had pushed it away with so many other memories of who I'd been before. But she was right. I'd done that, had seen injustice and refused to accept it, had fought back with intelligence and evidence instead of emotion, had won. That woman is still in there, Jennifer continued. Gregory hasn't killed her. He just made her hibernate for a while. But she's waking up now. And honestly, I feel sorry for him, because he has no idea who he's actually dealing with. We talked for another hour. She filled me in on her life, the school, mutual friends we'd both lost touch with, offered to help however she could, reminded me that I had people who cared about me, a whole life that had existed before Gregory and would exist after him. By the time we hung up, I felt stronger, more certain, more like myself than I had in years. That night, I slept in the guest room. Couldn't bring myself to lie in the bed I'd shared with him. Not now, not knowing what I knew. Instead, I lay in the small room with its simple furnishings and felt something like peace settle over me. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more decisions, more steps on this unexpected path. But tonight, I could rest, could let myself be still in the eye of the storm I'd created, because I had created a storm. Gregory thought he was flying off into a beautiful sunset with his new love, leaving his useless wife to deal with the aftermath of his decisions. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that the wife he'd left behind was not the same woman he'd been married to. That woman had died this morning when he'd called her useless, and in her place was someone new. Someone who understood that survival sometimes meant becoming the person you never thought you'd need to be. Someone who understood that justice and revenge, while not the same thing, sometimes looked remarkably similar. Someone who was going to make absolutely certain that Gregory's carefully laid plans crumbled into dust. Someone who was going to take back every piece of herself she'd given away and use it to build something new, something better, something that belonged only to her. The morning sun streaming through the guest room window woke me at 6:30, earlier than I'd expected given how little I'd actually slept. My body felt heavy, weighed down by exhaustion and the emotional toll of the previous day, but my mind was sharp and clear. I had 3 attorney consultations scheduled, starting at 9, and I needed to be prepared for each one. I needed to show them that I wasn't some helpless abandoned wife looking for a savior. I was a woman with a strategy, with evidence, with determination to fight for what was rightfully mine. I showered in the guest bathroom, standing under water so hot it turned my skin pink, trying to wash away the last remnants of who I'd been yesterday morning. The woman who'd stood in the kitchen receiving that devastating phone call felt like a stranger now, someone from a different lifetime. In less than 24 hours, I'd transformed from passive victim to active participant in my own life. The shift felt both terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing you could either fall or fly. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes I hadn't worn in years. A tailored navy suit I'd bought for job interviews before I stopped working. Professional and sharp, heels that added 3 inches to my height, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, makeup subtle but polished. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked competent, confident, ready for battle. The first attorney's office was downtown, in one of those glass towers that dominated the Portland skyline. I arrived 15 minutes early, used the time to review my notes, to remind myself of all the points I needed to cover. When the receptionist called my name at exactly 9 o'clock, I stood and followed her down a hallway, lined with impressive credentials and awards. Robert Chen was in his 50s, impeccably dressed, with sharp eyes that seemed to assess everything in seconds. His office was all dark wood and leather, the kind of space designed to intimidate and impress in equal measure. He gestured for me to sit, then settled into his own chair and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Patterson, I reviewed the materials you sent yesterday. This is quite a situation you're in." "It is, and I need someone who can help me navigate it effectively." He nodded, steepling his fingers. "Your husband has been planning this divorce for months, possibly longer. He's consulted with Donald Webb, who's an excellent attorney with a reputation for aggressive asset protection. They've built what they believe is a strong case for minimal settlement to you based on the length of your marriage, your voluntary exit from the workforce, and the fact that most major assets are solely in his name." "I know. I read all their correspondence." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Did you? How did you manage that?" He never logged out of his email on his home computer. I had access to everything. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "That was smart. However, I need to tell you that any evidence obtained without his explicit permission may not be admissible in court. We'll need to build our case on legally obtained documentation." My heart sank. "So all that information is useless?" "Not useless. It tells us their strategy, which is valuable." but we can't use the emails themselves as evidence. However, we can use what you learned to guide our investigation. We'll subpoena the same information legally. Request discovery on all the points you now know to look for. Your knowledge gives us an enormous advantage, even if we can't use the actual documents you obtained. We spent the next hour going through everything in detail. He asked pointed questions about our marriage, our finances, my contributions to the household. He took extensive notes, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of acknowledgement. When I told him about transferring half the joint account to my own name, he actually smiled. That was completely legal and actually quite clever. Joint account means joint ownership. You had every right to that money. In fact, I'd recommend you transfer your half of any other joint assets as soon as possible, before he has a chance to do the same. There's a joint credit card with about $15,000 available credit, and we have a joint investment account with about $60,000 in it. The investment account you can't touch without his signature, but document it thoroughly. The credit card is trickier. Technically, you can use it, but any charges you make would be considered marital debt subject to division. However, if you need to make purchases for legitimate expenses, that's defensible. We discussed strategy, timelines, likely outcomes. He was knowledgeable and thorough, but something about his approach felt too detached, too clinical. He saw this as a puzzle to solve, a game to win, but I needed someone who understood the emotional devastation behind the legal maneuvering. Someone who would fight not just for my financial interests, but for my dignity. I thanked him for his time and left, promising to be in touch after I met with the other attorneys. The second consultation was at 10:30 in a smaller office across town. Patricia Williams was younger than Chen, probably early 40s, with warm brown eyes and an immediately personable manner. Her office was bright and welcoming, filled with plants and natural light, a stark contrast to Chen's intimidating space. "Amanda, thank you for coming in. I have to say, when I read your email yesterday, I was both heartbroken and impressed. Heartbroken by what you're going through, but impressed by how you've already started fighting back." There was something about her directness that made me feel instantly comfortable. "Thank you. I'm still figuring out how to process everything, but I know I need to be strategic." "You absolutely do, and you've already made some smart moves. Securing half the joint account was exactly right. Changing the locks on the house was bold, but legally defensible since it's your primary residence. Documenting everything, even if we can't use those specific emails, gives us a roadmap. We went through similar territory as I had with Chen, but Patricia's approach was different. She didn't just ask about facts and figures. She asked about my emotional state, my support system, my plans for the future. She wanted to understand not just the legal case, but the whole person involved in it. "Here's what I see," she said after about 45 minutes. "You have a stronger position than your husband thinks you do. Yes, he makes more money and has his name on the house, but you sacrificed your career to support his. You managed the household, which freed him to focus on work. You tried fertility treatments, which is documented medical history showing your investment in the marriage. And most importantly, he committed adultery and planned this divorce while still accepting your support and care. That matters. Will it matter enough? In Oregon, we're a no-fault divorce state, so technically the adultery itself won't affect the settlement. But it affects the narrative. It shows his character. And judges are human. They respond to stories, not just spreadsheets. Your story is compelling. You're not some gold digger who married for money. You're a woman who gave up her own career and dreams to support a man who repaid you with betrayal and cruelty." I felt tears prick my eyes, but pushed them back. "What do you think I can realistically expect? Honestly, more than his attorney thinks he'll have to pay. The house may be in his name, but it's a marital asset purchased during your marriage with joint income. You're entitled to a portion of its equity, the retirement accounts, the investments, all marital assets subject to division. And given the length of your marriage and your career sacrifice, you're entitled to spousal support. Not forever, but long enough to get on your feet, maybe go back to school, or retrain for work." His lawyer seems to think I'll get almost nothing. His lawyer is trying to scare him into thinking that so he'll accept a lowball settlement offer. But if we push back, if we're willing to go to trial if necessary, I think we can do significantly better. It won't be 50-50 of everything, but it will be fair. We talked for another 30 minutes about next steps, strategy, what I should do in the immediate future. By the time I left her office, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real hope. Not the desperate kind I'd been clinging to in my marriage, but the solid variety built on reality and competent advocacy. The third attorney was at 1 o'clock, giving me time to grab lunch, even though I could barely eat. I forced down a sandwich at a cafe near the office, watching people go about their normal lives, wondering how many of them were hiding pain behind pleasant facades, how many marriages that looked fine from the outside were actually dissolving from within. How many women were sitting across from their husbands at dinner pretending everything was okay, while knowing it was anything but. Marcus Rodriguez's office was in a converted warehouse in the Pearl District, all exposed brick and modern furniture. He was in his late 30s, casually dressed in jeans and a button-down shirt, with an easy confidence that immediately put me at ease. His assistant offered me coffee, which I accepted, and then Marcus came out to greet me personally, rather than having me shown to his office. "Amanda, come on back. Thanks for making the trip across town." His office was an interesting mix of professional and personal. Law books and case files mixed with family photos and what looked like kids' artwork framed on the walls. A guitar sat in the corner. It felt like the space of someone who understood that work and life weren't separate compartments, but intertwined realities. "So I read everything you sent," he started, settling into his chair with a directness I appreciated. "And I'm going to be straight with you. Your husband is a piece of work." I actually laughed, surprised by the bluntness. That's one way to put it. I mean it. The calculated nature of this, the way he's trying to screw you over while acting like he's being reasonable, the cruelty of that phone call, it's beyond normal divorce nastiness. It's vindictive. I'm starting to see that. Good. Because that anger you're feeling, that's not wrong or petty or unjustified. That's your instinct telling you that you've been wronged and you deserve better. Listen to it. We went through the case details, but Marcus kept bringing it back to the emotional truth underneath the legal maneuvering. He understood that this wasn't just about money or assets. It was about someone treating me as disposable after I'd given them everything. It was about reclaiming my sense of worth after being told I had none. "Here's what I think," he said finally. "Patricia Williams, did you meet with her this morning?" "Yes, at 10:30. She's excellent. One of the best family law attorneys in the city. If she's willing to take your case, you should seriously consider her. But if you want my opinion, what you really need right now isn't just a lawyer. You need a team. You need someone handling the legal aspects, but you also need a therapist to process the emotional trauma. You need a financial advisor to help you understand your options and plan for your future. You need friends and family who can support you. You need to rebuild your whole life, not just win a legal battle. That's overwhelming." "It is, but you can do it. I can see that you're stronger than you think you are. You've already proven that by how you've responded in the last day. You didn't fall apart. You strategized. You acted. You protected yourself. That takes serious strength." By the time I left his office at 2:30, I knew who I was going to hire. Patricia Williams had the legal expertise and the empathy. She understood both the strategy and the story. And Marcus was right that I needed more than just a lawyer. I needed to build a whole support system, to rebuild Amanda Patterson into someone who existed beyond being Gregory's wife. I called Patricia from my car and told her I wanted to retain her services. She sounded pleased and immediately launched into next steps. She'd draft a response to Gregory's eventual divorce filing, would start gathering discovery materials, would protect my interests aggressively. We scheduled a longer meeting for the following week to go through everything in detail. In the meantime, she advised me to document everything, keep copies of all financial records, and avoid contact with Gregory except through attorneys. That last part would be easy since Gregory was still somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, blissfully unaware that his carefully constructed plan was already falling apart. I drove home in the late afternoon traffic, exhausted but feeling more centered than I had in months, maybe years. The house looked different when I pulled into the driveway, knowing that Gregory couldn't just walk in anymore, that this space was mine to control now. I went inside, made myself tea, and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, beginning the work of documenting our entire financial history. Hours passed as I built spreadsheets and gathered documents, every bank statement, every investment record, every receipt I could find, every piece of evidence that showed our joint financial life, the one Gregory was trying to pretend didn't exist or didn't matter. By the time I looked up, it was after 9 and fully dark outside. I ordered takeout, something I never did when Gregory was home because he preferred home-cooked meals, ate it straight from the container at the kitchen counter, not bothering with plates or proper table setting. Small rebellions maybe, but they felt significant. Each choice I made for myself alone, each decision that prioritized my comfort over someone else's preferences, felt like reclaiming a tiny piece of territory. That night, I slept in the master bedroom, in the bed I'd shared with Gregory. It felt like an important step, not letting him take that space from me even in his absence. This was my house now, all of it, until a court decided otherwise. I wasn't going to cede any ground unnecessarily. The next day was Thursday. Gregory would be landing in Bali sometime this evening Portland time, given the time difference and travel time. I tried not to think about him stepping off the plane with Vanessa, both of them excited for their romantic getaway, unaware of what waited back home. Instead, I focused on practical matters. I went to the bank and opened a safe deposit box, storing copies of all my documentation where Gregory couldn't access them. I met with a financial advisor Patricia had recommended, someone who could help me understand the long-term implications of different settlement scenarios. I called my old teaching colleague Jennifer and asked if she knew of any teaching positions opening up for the next school year. I started researching certificate programs and continuing education courses I could take to update my credentials. Each action was a brick in the foundation of my new life. Each decision was me choosing a future instead of clinging to a past that no longer existed. Friday morning, I woke up to a series of increasingly frantic text messages from Gregory. They'd started coming in around 4 a.m, which meant he'd just discovered the state of our bank account when he landed in Bali. "Amanda, what the hell did you do? Where is the money from our account? This is illegal. You can't just take my money. Call me immediately. I'm serious, Amanda, call me right now. You're going to regret this." I read them with detached interest, noting the progression from confusion to anger to threats. Then I blocked his number and forwarded all the messages to Patricia. Let her deal with his outrage. I was done managing Gregory's emotions. 10 minutes later, my phone rang from an unknown international number. I didn't answer. It rang again and again, 5 times in a row before finally stopping. Then my email pinged with a message from Gregory. "I can't believe you'd stoop to this level. Stealing from our account, changing the locks on my house, acting like some kind of scorned woman out for revenge. I tried to handle this like adults, but apparently you're incapable of that. My attorney will be in touch. And just so you know, Vanessa is worth 10 of you. She's successful, ambitious, exciting. Everything you stopped being years ago. I should have left you sooner." I read it twice, waiting to feel hurt or angry or something. Instead, I just felt tired of his manipulation, his need to make himself the victim, his inability to take responsibility for his own choices. I forwarded the email to Patricia without responding. Her reply came within minutes. "Perfect. He's already making mistakes. The angrier he gets, the more he'll reveal. Don't engage. Let him spiral." So I did. I ignored the calls and emails and texts that kept coming throughout the day, each one more unhinged than the last. Gregory was used to me responding, to me trying to smooth things over, to me absorbing his emotions and managing them for him. My silence was apparently more infuriating than any argument could have been. By Friday evening, Patricia called me. His attorney reached out. "They're threatening legal action for you taking the money from the joint account." I told them to go ahead and try. Joint account means joint ownership, and you took exactly half. There's no legal basis for complaint. They're bluffing. What happens now? Now we wait for him to officially file for divorce, which his attorney says will happen Monday. Then we respond with our own filing, laying out what we want, and then we negotiate, or we go to trial if they won't be reasonable. How long does all this take? Months at minimum. Could be a year or more if it gets contentious. But you're okay financially for now with what you secured, right? For a while, yes. Long enough to figure out next steps. Good. Use this time well. Rebuild your support system. Start thinking about what you want your life to look like, because this is your chance to create something new, something better than what you had. The weekend passed in a strange limbo. Gregory's messages tapered off, probably on advice from his attorney. I spent Saturday clearing out his belongings from the house, packing them carefully in boxes that I stacked in the garage. His clothes, his personal items, his books and electronics. I wasn't destroying anything or acting vindictively. I was just making space for myself in a house that had been arranged around his preferences for too long. Sunday I drove out to the coast, something I hadn't done in years. walked along the beach for hours, letting the cold wind and the crash of waves clear my head. I'd forgotten how much I loved the ocean, how peaceful I found the endless rhythm of tides. Gregory had never liked the beach, said it was boring and too cold, so we'd stopped going. Another piece of myself I'd lost without even noticing. On the drive home, I called my parents. I'd been avoiding them, not ready to explain what was happening, but they deserved to know. My mother answered on the second ring, her voice bright with pleasure at hearing from me. "Amanda, sweetheart, we were just talking about you. How are you? How's Gregory?" I pulled over at a rest stop, unable to have this conversation while driving. "Mom, I need to tell you something. Gregory and I are getting divorced." Silence. Then, "What? When did this happen? Are you okay?" I told them everything. The phone call, the affair, the discovery of his planning, the actions I'd taken. My mother cried. My father swore, something I'd rarely heard him do. But underneath their shock and anger on my behalf, there was support. Unconditional, unwavering support. "Come home," my mother said. "Come stay with us for a while. You shouldn't be alone right now." "I'm okay, Mom. Actually, I'm better than I've been in a long time." I know that sounds strange, but it's true. "Your mother's right, though," my father added, having picked up the extension. "You don't have to go through this alone. We're here, whatever you need." We talked for over an hour. They asked questions, offered advice, expressed their anger at Gregory and their love for me. By the time we hung up, I felt lighter, supported, reminded that I had people in my life who valued me, who'd always valued me, even when I'd let one person's opinion override everyone else's. Monday morning brought the expected envelope. Divorce papers, served by a process server who apologized for the circumstances. I accepted them with surprising calm, flipped through the pages briefly, then called Patricia. They came. "I'll have my assistant pick them up this afternoon. In the meantime, don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, don't communicate with him or his attorney. Everything goes through me now." "Understood." "And Amanda, how are you holding up?" "Better than I expected. I think I'm actually okay." "Good, because this is going to get harder before it gets easier. He's going to try every manipulation tactic he knows. Stand firm." She was right. Over the next few weeks, Gregory deployed every weapon in his emotional arsenal. Anger through his attorney, claiming I was being unreasonable and vindictive. Attempts at direct contact through mutual friends, painting himself as the reasonable party willing to compromise if only I'd stop being difficult. Guilt trips via email about how I was making this harder than it needed to be, how we could end this amicably if I'd just be sensible. I ignored all of it, followed Patricia's advice, focused on rebuilding my life rather than engaging with his tactics. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage, started volunteering at an after-school tutoring program, remembering how much I'd loved working with children, looked into graduate programs for school counseling, thinking maybe I could combine my teaching experience with helping kids navigate difficult situations, started therapy with a counselor who specialized in divorce and rebuilding after betrayal. Each week brought small victories and setbacks. Good days where I felt strong and certain I'd made the right choices. Hard days where I mourned the loss of what I'd thought my life would be, even knowing that vision had been an illusion. The legal process ground forward slowly. Discovery revealed that Gregory had been even more deceptive than I'd realized. He'd opened credit cards in his name only and racked up debt on gifts for Vanessa. He'd been planning to quit his job and start a consulting business with her, using marital assets to fund it. He'd discussed buying a condo in Seattle where they'd relocate, far from me and the life he wanted to leave behind. All of it came out in depositions and document production. All of it strengthened my case and weakened his. Patricia was relentless, finding every inconsistency, every lie, every piece of evidence that showed his true character. 4 months after the divorce was filed, we had a settlement conference. This was where both parties and their attorneys sat down to negotiate in good faith, hopefully reaching an agreement that avoided trial. I dressed carefully that morning, armor of professionalism to get through what I knew would be difficult. Gregory was already there when I arrived with Patricia, sitting with his attorney in the conference room. I hadn't seen him since before that phone call, hadn't laid eyes on him in person in almost 5 months. He looked different, thinner, tired, older somehow. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of the love I'd once had for him. Then I remembered his voice on the phone calling me useless, and the feeling vanished. We sat across from each other at a large conference table, attorneys flanking us like seconds at a duel. The mediator, a neutral third party, explained the process. Each side would present their position. We'd negotiate, hopefully reach a compromise. Gregory's attorney went first, laying out their offer. A small lump sum payment, temporary spousal support for 2 years, and I'd walk away from any claim to the house, retirement accounts, or other major assets. It was insulting. Barely more than he'd originally planned to offer before I'd taken action. Patricia didn't even dignify it with a detailed response. My client rejects this offer entirely. It doesn't remotely reflect her contributions to this marriage or her legal entitlements. She laid out our counteroffer: 50% of all marital assets, including home equity, investments, and retirement accounts, spousal support for 5 years, and reimbursement for the money Gregory had spent on his affair using marital funds. His attorney looked shocked. That's completely unreasonable. Mrs. Patterson voluntarily left the workforce. She can't expect to be compensated for a choice she made freely. She left the workforce at her husband's request to support his career advancement, Patricia shot back. A sacrifice that directly contributed to his increased earning power and the accumulation of marital assets. She absolutely can and should be compensated for that. The negotiation went back and forth for hours. Offers and counteroffers, threats of trial, discussions of what a judge might rule. It was exhausting and frustrating and occasionally heated, but I noticed something as the day wore on. Gregory kept looking at me, trying to catch my eye, trying to engage me directly. I refused, looked at the mediator, at Patricia, at the documents in front of me, anywhere but at him. Finally, after 6 hours, we reached an agreement. Not everything I wanted, but far more than Gregory had wanted to give. 40% of marital assets, including a significant portion of home equity that would require him to refinance or sell the house. Spousal support for 4 years, declining annually to give me time to reestablish my career. And a settlement amount that represented partial reimbursement for affair-related spending. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair. And it was enough to give me a solid foundation to rebuild my life. As we signed the papers, Gregory finally spoke directly to me for the first time that day. "I hope you're happy. You've taken everything I worked for." I looked at him then, really looked at him, and felt nothing but pity. "No, Gregory. I took what I earned, what I sacrificed for, what I'm legally entitled to. You took everything yourself when you chose to betray our marriage and then try to leave me with nothing. I never loved you. Not really. I stayed because it was comfortable, because it was easier than being alone. You were never enough for me." The words should have hurt. A few months ago, they would have destroyed me. But now they just confirmed what I already knew. He was cruel, small, incapable of real love or loyalty, and his opinion of me had no bearing on my worth. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said calmly, "but your inability to love me doesn't diminish my value. It just reveals your limitations." I stood, gathered my things, and walked out of that conference room with my head high. Behind me, I could hear his attorney trying to calm him down, his voice rising in protest about something. But I didn't look back, didn't engage, just kept walking toward the elevator, toward my car, toward my future. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. A judge signed off on our settlement agreement. And just like that, 12 years of marriage ended with a signature on legal documents. I went to the courthouse alone to pick up the final papers, stood on the steps outside afterward, breathing in the cold December air, feeling the weight of my married name fall away. I was Amanda Grant again, not Amanda Patterson, the woman I'd been before Gregory, except I wasn't really her either. I was someone new, someone who'd been forged in the fire of betrayal and come out stronger, someone who knew her worth, someone who wouldn't settle for less than she deserved ever again. I used part of my settlement to go back to school, enrolling in a master's program in school counseling that would allow me to work with children dealing with trauma. I found an apartment I actually loved, a light-filled space in an old building with character and charm. I adopted a rescue dog, a scruffy terrier mix who'd been abandoned and learned to trust again, a daily reminder that broken things could heal. I reconnected with my passion for teaching, taking a part-time position at a local elementary school while finishing my degree. Started dating casually. Nothing serious, just remembering what it felt like to be seen and appreciated. Traveled to places Gregory had never wanted to go. Took up painting, read books he'd dismissed as frivolous. Slowly, deliberately, built a life that was authentically mine. Months turned into a year, then 2. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Gregory and Vanessa's relationship had imploded within 6 months of my divorce being finalized. Apparently, the excitement of an affair didn't translate to the reality of an actual relationship. They'd broken up bitterly, each blaming the other for the failure. I felt nothing when I heard that. No satisfaction, no vindication. Just a distant acknowledgement that people who bond over betrayal rarely build lasting trust. I heard he'd struggled financially after having to pay the settlement and refinance the house, that he'd had to sell it at a loss when he couldn't afford the mortgage on his own, that his career had stalled after word got around about the circumstances of our divorce, that he'd moved to a smaller apartment, a step down from the life he'd been trying to build with Vanessa. Again, I felt nothing. His life, his struggles, his choices and consequences had nothing to do with me anymore. He was just someone I used to know, someone who'd taught me hard lessons about self-worth and boundaries and the danger of losing yourself in someone else's life. 3 years after that phone call that shattered my world, I stood in front of a classroom of third graders on the first day of school. I'd finished my counseling degree, but realized I'd missed teaching too much to step away completely. So I'd found a position that let me do both, teaching part-time while serving as the school counselor the rest of the week. The children looked at me with wide eyes, nervous and excited for the new year ahead. I smiled at them, remembering my first day teaching more than 15 years ago, remembering the woman I'd been then, ambitious, independent, full of dreams. I was her again, or maybe I was better than her, because that woman hadn't yet learned what she was capable of surviving, hadn't yet discovered the strength that came from being broken and choosing to rebuild, hadn't yet understood that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the catalyst for the best thing. "Good morning, everyone," I said to my new class. "I'm Ms. Grant, and we're going to have an amazing year together. But before we start, I want to tell you something important. This classroom is a place where everyone has value, where everyone's contributions matter, where we support each other and lift each other up, because that's how we build something beautiful together." The children nodded, not quite understanding the weight behind my words, but they would learn. Over the course of the year, they'd learn what it meant to be valued and supported. They'd learn that their worth wasn't dependent on someone else's opinion. They'd learn that they had the power to choose kindness, to choose integrity, to choose themselves. The same lessons I'd learned the hard way. That evening, I sat on my apartment balcony with a glass of wine, my dog curled up at my feet, watching the sun set over the city. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer, asking if I wanted to meet for dinner that weekend. Another from my mother, sharing a funny meme. Another from a man I'd been seeing casually, suggesting a movie date. My life was full, not perfect, not the fairy tale I'd once imagined, but real, honest, mine. I thought about Gregory sometimes, usually with a detached curiosity about how my life would have unfolded if things had been different, if he hadn't called me useless, if he hadn't left for Bali with Vanessa, if I hadn't found out about his betrayal and planning. I'd probably still be living in that house, still playing the role of devoted wife, still shrinking myself to fit into his life, still believing that my worth was tied to his approval, still lost in a marriage that looked fine from the outside while slowly suffocating me from within. The betrayal had been brutal, the pain had been real, the process of rebuilding had been exhausting. But in the end, Gregory had given me something he never intended. He'd given me back myself. The phone call that was meant to destroy me had actually freed me. The cruelty that was meant to diminish me had actually strengthened me. The abandonment that was meant to leave me with nothing had actually given me everything that mattered, because I'd learned that I was enough, all by myself, without a husband or a marriage or someone else's validation. I was enough, and that knowledge, that deep certainty of my own worth, was worth more than any settlement or revenge or vindication could ever be. I raised my wine glass to the sunset, to the journey I'd traveled, to the woman I'd become. To useless women, I said quietly, smiling. May we all discover our power. My dog looked up at me, tail wagging, and I laughed. Even he knew the truth that Gregory had been too blind to see. I'd never been useless. I'd been undervalued. There was a difference, and now finally, I valued myself enough for both of us. They say living well is the best revenge. I don't know if I believe in revenge anymore, but I do believe in justice. And sometimes justice looks like someone calling you useless and you proving them wrong in every possible way. Not to spite them, not to show them what they lost, but to show yourself what you were always capable of. Gregory thought he was flying off to his new life, leaving me behind with nothing. Instead, He'd freed me to build something better than anything we'd had together, something authentic, something mine. The money in that bank account, the half I'd transferred before he landed in Bali, had been the first step. But it wasn't the real victory. The real victory was standing here 3 years later, happy and whole and completely at peace with who I'd become. The real victory was knowing that I'd never let anyone make me feel useless again, that I'd never sacrifice my identity for someone else's comfort, that I'd never forget my own worth while trying to prove it to someone incapable of seeing it. The real victory was surviving, and then thriving, and then helping others do the same. So thank you, Gregory, for the phone call, for the betrayal, for the cruel words that shattered my illusions and forced me to face reality. You thought you were destroying me. Instead, you were setting me free. And I've never been more grateful for anything in my life. Have you ever had someone underestimate you, only to prove them spectacularly wrong? Have you ever survived something you thought would destroy you and come out stronger on the other side? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes we need to hear that we're not alone in our struggles, that others have walked this path and made it through. If this story resonated with you, if it gave you hope or strength or perspective, subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. We all have moments when we're called useless or worthless or not enough, but the truth is always different. The truth is that we're stronger than we know, braver than we think, more resilient than we imagine, and sometimes the worst thing that happens to us becomes the doorway to the best version of ourselves. Remember, you are not defined by how someone else treats you. You are defined by how you respond, by whether you let their cruelty diminish you or use it as fuel to rise higher than they ever imagined possible. Choose to rise. Always choose to rise, because you are enough. You always have been. You just might not have known it until someone tried to take everything away and you discovered you could rebuild from nothing. That's real power. That's real strength. That's real victory. And nobody can ever take that away from you.